All right, so now we want to talk about how to use or apply these theorems. In this problem, you're going to need to mark your pictures on your paper. I knew that some of this information wasn't going to print exactly for you, so you need to label your parallelogram as F, G, H, J. Your diagonals should have printed, and they intersect at a point called K. F, G measures 5, and G to K is measuring 3. Now they're asking us to find two measurements. They're asking us to find how much is it from J to H and how much is it from J to K. And I hope that you can remember our theorems, because our first theorem said today that opposite sides are congruent. So that would mean that J to H has to be 5. And our last theorem said that the diagonals are bisecting each other. So this point K is the midpoint of both diagonals. So that means from J to K has to be 3. So there's an explanation there. We know that opposite sides are congruent, like we said. And we know that diagonals are bisecting each other. And so J to K has to be 3. Now let's talk about angles. Again, mark your picture, make sure your sides are marked parallel, that this angle at P is marked as 70 in your picture. They're asking us to find how much is R and how much is Q. And y'all, there's only two relationships, and these are same relationships we've been working with all year: congruent or supplementary. And if we remember our theorems, R is opposite to P. So it would measure 70, but R and Q are consecutive. Consecutive is that supplementary relationship. So since R is opposite, it would be 70. Since Q is supplementary to P, it has to be 110. Now here's a little algebra situation, but we're still working with that same notion. I'm thinking, are these opposite and congruent, or are these consecutive and supplementary? And so I understand that they are supplementary. So I will set up in my head, I'm thinking S and R add up to be 180. And I'm going to replace that with the algebra and arithmetic. I'm going to carry out subtracting 120 from both sides. So 3x is 60. So x has to be 20. So we're using a little bit of algebra there. And then there's one last theorem that we can talk about in the same section, because in essence we're seeing these little parallelograms formed in this figure. It says you got to have 3 or more parallel lines that cut off congruent segments on one transversal, then they cut off congruent segments on every transversal. So in this situation, if I have 3 parallel lines and I know that one of the transversals has been cut into congruent pieces, then I know that the other transversal has been cut into congruent pieces. Now it doesn't mean that all 4 of these are the same. It just means that the 2 on one transversal are congruent to each other, then the other 2 on this transversal would also be congruent. So this is today's lesson in a nutshell. We talked about 5 theorems, but 4 of them apply to parallelograms. We have to remember that opposite sides are congruent, consecutive angles are supplementary, opposite angles are congruent, and diagonals bisect each other. Your assignment for today is to complete Reteaching 6.2 Properties of Parallelograms. The first page of the reteaching are examples of how to apply these theorems, pretty much what we've just done on this video. and then you have 15 questions to answer. You will be required to show your work in the margins of the paper, and make sure you do that if you want to get full credit for your work.